Uh, Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Woozer Gods and Deities by Jason Mohaghegh. Every ancient pantheon refers to its own Woozer gods, whether we look to Babylon, Egypt, Greece, China, the Aztecs, or myriad indigenous cosmologies. You will find the stories of those lesser deities who have been disgraced, banished, or punished. Some have absurd physiologies or disfigurements. Others follow paranormal rituals or possess borderline useless powers that cause them to fall outside the top levels of the universal hierarchy. Some have been forgotten, lost in time. Others are feared for they bring plague, famine, disease. Still others play no role in the world's destiny or dwell in the shadows, the vapor, or the nothing itself. Prometheus, Medusa, Arachne, Set, Ahriman, Nezha, Sedna, Loki, Hades, Pandora, Kali, Tiamat, Xolotl, Aipaloovik, Erlik, Satan, and thousands more. This seminar will track these woozer gods and resurrect their narratives as a new philosophical, mystical outlook. Through them, we will wonder about alternative existences, there those ones most neglected might rule. Jason Mohaghegh is a philosopher, literary theorist, and professor of comparative literature at Babson College. His work tracks currents of experimental thought across the so-called East and the West, with particular attention to concepts of chaos, violence, illusion, silence, extremism, mania, disappearance, night, evil, secrecy, and apocalyptic writing. He has published 9 books to date, including 2 volumes titled Omnicide 1 and 2 on madness, and 2 volumes on night titled Night, a philosophy of the after dark, and Night 2, a philosophy of the last word. My name is Marina, and I'll be your moderator during this seminar. And now I'm going to pass the mic to Jason.
Thank you so much, Marina. It's wonderful seeing all of you. Thanks for joining again in what should be a fun adventure. And again, most of the creativity is going to rest on your shoulders this semester, in that starting next week, everyone is going to come and present their own loser god, sort of from one of the categories that we're exploring. Can be from any region, cultural backdrop, mythological tradition. It's up to you. So just go find the most obscure, the most in mythologies that you can excavate. So as Manu was saying, when she read the description of the course, it's fascinated me for decades that almost all cosmologies, mythologies from any civilization, region, or time period contains myths about loser gods. Now, when I was younger, this kind of shows the evolution or devolution of a temperament of a thinker. When I was younger, I was most intrigued by loser gods who rose in the hierarchy to become the absolute deity, sort of at the top of the pyramid. So maybe I was more vengeful in my youth, or liked to see sort of some rebel justice of some kind. But now I prefer when I find that these loser gods wander the margins as just mesmerizing fabrications of very minor storytelling. In fact, if I can find within a tradition that there are only 2 or 3 references, very elusive, vague references or rumors sort of associated with God, that they don't have a full narrative tradition, that they don't have a fully fleshed out lineage or backdrop or intentionality, that intrigues me far more. I like to see them as far from the centers of power and from Mount Olympus and from the pyramid as possible. Because what ends up happening is that the people who are attracted to developing those storytelling modalities for these loser gods, these outcast gods, you'll notice that they are far more idiosyncratic, far less anthropomorphic, which is an interesting detail as well, and just more experimental in visuality, in body, in sort of the realm of appearances, sensation, sort of as well as the conceptual connections that they make. So let me jump quickly here. We'll see how much we can get through today. I want to give you a guided tour of the loser god universe as much as I can very quickly. But Is everyone able to see this slide, the first slide? You just nod for me? Excellent. Okay. So the first thing that I want to say is that I don't often reveal this, but maybe I've said it somewhere else, that about 20, this makes me feel old, probably about 22 years ago, I was very young, and I came into contact with someone in North Africa, around the areas of Tunisia and Libya near the borders, who was part of a secret society that believed that in North Africa from thousands of years ago, that believed that there are certain tragic nights on the calendar every 370 years or so, I believe it is, when the gods can supposedly slide from the sky to the earthly reality for a few hours, and they become extremely vulnerable. So they can bleed, they can feel pain, they can be assaulted, they can have their powers thieved, they can even die. Now, the function of this secret society is to train generations to serve as guardians on those evenings of heavenly collapse. So they're the ones who hold vigil and keep lookout on the nights when the gods can lose everything. And I always loved this sort of tracing this secret society and learning as much as I can about it, particularly through that one contact that I had, because he himself was someone who was training his daughter. Now, the interesting thing is the timeline. If it's every it was either 270 or 370 years. I don't know why I always mix those up. But either way, it means that the likelihood of it falling under your lifespan is very low. But it also means that the possibility of it falling under his daughter's lifespan, for instance, would mean that she will be an 86-year-old woman. I did the math. When she has to fight on behalf of the gods, when the gods become losers because they fall from their celestial plane. So this is a very interesting secret society that already shows that they were in the pagan worlds, in the pagan traditions, polytheistic traditions. There was already a sense that gods could lose their destinies, could lose their powers, right? And this far predates monotheism. Now, an extra intriguing fact is that, and I say this everywhere, is that these defective or outcast gods were also often believed in almost every tradition I've studied, that on rare occasions, they are the ones who have to save the world. So supposedly, there'd be these, again, nights of exception where the heroic dominant divinities, they find themselves chained or wounded by some fiendish cosmic force, a dragon, whatever, sea serpent in the sky. And it's the who has to rise to the form into the Egyptian pantheon with Set, who later becomes Satan. That Set does save the world continually. So this is a very interesting notion because the reason why Set does this is not a moral one. It's a question of whim and mood. And I really like that. If Set is in the right mood, now he always happens to be in the right mood, supposedly to save the world. But then that's why he does it. That's how it's described, according to that. Now, another way of looking at the idea of loser gods is the fact that almost every culture has festivals as well. And most people don't know this. I learned this myself decades ago when I read Roger Caillois, who's a very close ally of George Bataille. He was part of his secret society. And Caillois has an amazing short text called The Theory of the Festival, where he explains that festivals are just ritualized resurrections of a lost golden age. So you're performing a lost golden age where the ancestors lived in an idealized time of excess and rapture, and they held supernatural powers. This, by the way, even bleeds into the Bible. Notice how all the first characters of the Bible live for like 800 years. They often have paranormal abilities, right? And so this even comes from that old festival notion that at the beginning of time there were superior ancestors who lived in a kind of utopian or super strength. They're ageless. They read minds, even in some traditions, telekinesis, they can move objects, future telling, time travel even. If you can believe it, already time travel is a concept, a literary concept explored in the narratives of about 3,500 BC, when you look at Babylon and Sumeria, right? So the festival event, what's a festival? It's a transient simulation of that forsaken origin of civilization. But for our purposes, what's the trick? The trick is to ask why these ancestors who were so unbelievable, who had all these supernatural capacities, why they died out. And the explanation usually entails two types of possibilities. Either one, there's a natural disaster of some kind, some ice age or some flood that wipes them into extinction, or, this is the more common one, they willfully sacrificed themselves, martyred themselves so that humanity could be born. What a terrible choice I think they made, but that's all right. I wish they had just hung around flying and reading minds. That would have been much better. But at any rate, that's the notion, that they relinquished their exquisite world. They lost their world. They became intense. So that's a loser god story for us as well. Every festival is to honor the loser gods who were greater than us, just so that our imperfect world could emerge. And that's the creation story for the human race. That's the fall from grace, sort of. But in here, it's a martyrological one. Now, again, back to Egypt. You see on the right side there in the blue, and if you ever get to go to Egypt, I would recommend above everywhere to go to the Temple of Dendera. That's from the Temple of Dendera. Absolutely stunning. Elevated walls, and it has a whole narrative, very elegant narrative about the Ogdoad. Now, the Egyptian Ogdoad is from Old Egypt. It's one of the oldest stories. And it's the notion that in the primordial anarchy of the void, so before even the famous Egyptian gods that you all know, maybe Horus and Ra and those figures, in the primordial anarchy of the void, there were four pairs, there were four man-woman couples that were sort of linked together. They were four frog-headed gods and four snake-headed goddesses of chaos. Interesting. And they were the primary figures of the creation myth. That's called the Ogdoad. And they represented these four principles. Now, it's really interesting to look at Egypt, one of the most ancient civilizations, and to think conceptually and philosophically, what are their four primary principles? Their four concepts. And they are water, infinity, darkness, and invisibility. That's a strange thing. I bet you wouldn't bet on invisibility being one of the prime movers of creation. But it's an awesome thing. And so these four couples, the frog-headed and snake-headed goddesses and gods, they are emblematic of water, infinity, darkness, and invisibility. Now, according to their story arc, these coupled spirits also expired themselves at the inception of the world and retreated to the land of the dead, where their necro energy keeps the Nile River circulating. So they're also martyrs. Right? For the sake of creation, they killed themselves, essentially. And I just have a picture there of Novalis, who's a romantic polymath. Some of you may know, but he doesn't get much radio play in the history of philosophy. He doesn't get much representation for a variety of reasons. That could be a whole class in itself, by the way. We're talking about loser gods. You could also look at loser philosophers, right? Loser thinkers, loser writers, writers who didn't make the cut or who aren't really in the canon, and go forward like that. Ones who were supposed to be losers, like Kafka and Beckett, who get redeemed and suddenly become Nobel Prize winners and things like that in the case of Beckett. So that's an interesting thing to happen. But in the case of Novalis, Novalis isn't often taken that seriously in the history of philosophy. And it's partially because he advanced some perverse outlooks, where he thinks that all of being is composed of malformations. So this is a close friend of mine who's taught at the New Center. Some of you may have taken a course with him, Michael Marder, who's the king of vegetal philosophers of dust and jungle and the elements and things like that. He's the one who often mentions Novalis here. And he always says that Novalis believed that plants are just diseased stones, and animals are just diseased plants, and humans are just diseased animals. Now, neither Michael, my friend, says this, nor Novalis says this, but I would take this convoluted equation then a step further to conclude for us that God then would just be an exponentially magnified version of a diseased human, like a vampire. Vampire is a diseased human, right, in a sense. So the top tier of the pyramid of identity for Novalis is the most wretched pathological state. So God is the ultimate flawed condition, the summit of malfunction or virality, right? So that's just a cool way to go. Now, at the heart of what I want to present to you today, just because I have to give us some schematic to follow, I've just put 12. We can have more, and we will multiply more. But here are 12 of the first typologies of loser gods that I want us to consider, like a gallery. And then I'll give you kind of a gallery of mythological faces and profiles, and we'll put them in there. But first, we have dethroned gods. So these are figures who once held the universe's crown, but then they were eventually overthrown. Think of Kronos, Father Time, right, is a good example of that. Then we have gods of failed revolutions. So they're losers because they aspired to reverse the hierarchies of dominance, but then they were subjugated and defeated in their uprisings. Satan is a good example of that. Third, we have the outcast gods, who for whatever reason are thrown into exile, and there are a million narratives of exiled gods which are fascinating. Fourth, we have gods of lost powers. So there are different renditions of this as well, but these are deities who once held miraculous abilities, but then lost their gifts. Now, whether that's a temporary or permanent disenchantment is always an interesting question. Fifth are the gods of lost status. So these are gods who once ruled over the popular imagination. They had their divinity cults, but then they just became archaic display items in the glass cases of a museum. So they were abandoned, forgotten, and neglected in history. And that's an interesting concept as well. Sixth, we have a favorite of mine and of many shamanic cultures, the trickster gods. So they're losers in most pantheons only because they're volatile, unreliable, and they have temperamental natures. So neither the gods trust them, nor do humans really trust them, because they follow these mercurial logics. And you could even throw someone like Dionysus, Nietzsche's favorite god, in there because his drunkenness, his permanent intoxication, makes him a wild card, right? Seventh, they're the gods who inflict curses, so famine, drought, pestilence, the death of the firstborn. And I would note to you that a lot of these god types are even in the ancient monotheistic God of the Old Testament. That God is a God of curses as well, right? So they get brought in. And it ties them to projections of malice. Eighth, they're hideous gods who are either disfigured, mutilated, or have detached limbs. And I wish, that it's become increasingly studied and popular, and I'm happy about that. What's called disability theory, and the histories of disability over time, because that is a sub-history of thought. But more importantly, it's an existential question of how entire peoples have been shunned, scorned, tortured, persecuted across time because of their physiologies and all of that. But what they don't often do, because it's not considered serious, is to look how there are even deformed gods in every pantheon and how those deformities are represented. Now, that storytelling technique, those modalities would give great insight into the psychological and sociological treatment of those who are disfigured, mutilated, or have detached limbs. And you see that in all the god formations as well. They're always represented that way. Hephaestus in the Greek, but then there are a million more that we can talk about. And that would be a way of understanding philosophies of stigma and also of the scapegoat a lot of the time. And so anyway, and by the way, this is just to show you how we often give ourselves credit for being more advanced philosophically in the present than we were in the past. I would just mention that you guys know what phantom limb syndrome is, correct? That's someone who's either an amputee or who's lost a limb like an arm, and they can still feel it. Sometimes they still feel pain or tingling in it. And also there are patients, this is often a symptomatology of cardiac surgery, open heart surgery, that people who've undergone open heart surgery later swear they feel that something like a sliver of their soul was extracted from their chests, that they're missing something in their interiority. Do you guys know that both of those syndromes, both phantom limb syndrome and the open heart surgery syndrome, were explained as the causes of certain deformed gods? The motivations and intentions of certain in the ancient world. So even then, I mean, they had people with these syndromes and they described those sensations as the causes of certain gods of defect, mutilation, deformity, right? So it's just really interesting to see how even those very advanced medical syndromes were brought into the mythologies. Ninth, we have the minor or irrelevant gods who have been part of, again, genealogies going all the way back to Babylon. They're formally otherworldly, but typically they spend their time consumed by trivial activities. They're self-indulgent, hedonistic, decadent pleasure seekers, or just irrelevant. So a good example of that, now this could be that they were always irrelevant and no one cared about them, some weird creature who has otherworldly abilities and origins, but doesn't really play a major role in the story, or they became irrelevant. So a good example of that in the Greek side are the Cyclopes, the Cyclops, the three brothers. They are absolutely essential to creation. They're the actual builders of universe and world, right? They swing hammers wildly. That's why your mountains are jagged. They're not smooth builders. They're chaotic builders. But they are the workmen of creation. I love the fact that it's three brothers, which means they're immortal, but they can't reproduce, which is an interesting fact. So there'll never be more than three. And they have primordial wisdom. They've seen the beginning of the world, and yet they're always described as childlike, throwing tantrums. You see it with Odysseus when he confronts one of the Cyclopes on the island, and he gets angry and infuriated. So they just are known for stomping around an island, doing nothing all day but throwing rocks in the middle of the ocean, and that's their sort of loser status then. But they were once truly essential. They fulfilled one great function, and then they were not necessary anymore. Our 10th typology are absurd gods. So these are enigmatic gods who do, again, weird things like counting every mushroom that grows on the earth. That's actually a god story. It has no sacred relevance. Mushrooms in that particular culture don't have any ritual or ceremonial significance. It's just something they do as a diversion or a hobby or a curiosity. So those are interesting gods. And by the way, this is even in the Islamic tradition. They say that Michael, the Archangel Michael, after the great war against Satan, there are no great wars anymore. He's a warrior god, so he doesn't need to fight. So what the Muslim Sufis in particular, mystics, imagine that his job is to count every rain droplet that falls on the earth. So he's like a cosmic accountant of the most useless tabulations. So in a sense, he becomes a loser god too in his absurdity, in this futile, trivial gesture. 9th are the martyred gods, the sacrificial ones who perished from existence, became lost causes, became non-beings. So these are interesting figures because they're often frozen as star constellations. If you guys ever read about, his name escapes me for the moment, the centaur who trains all the great heroes. So Achilles, teacher in war. He's this great centaur figure, half man, half horse. And he ends up dying because he aligns himself with Prometheus. He feels bad for Prometheus, and he objects to his punishment. Another loser god, right? Prometheus, the one who's slung to a rock and his liver gets eaten out every day by an eagle. And he goes to help Prometheus, and the gods have to punish them, but they feel bad about that, so Zeus turns him into a star constellation because it's kind of a noble, sacrificial sort of thing about him. And lastly, they are gods of accident or catastrophe or accidental catastrophe. Now, that's a really interesting thing. They're gods who will, with design, thunderstorms and lightning and earthquakes and things like famine. And then there are gods who incidentally and inadvertently bring about these types of phenomena of catastrophe and misfortune. So that's interesting, whether they purposely or involuntarily damn those who cross their paths. So all of that being said, before you think that this is simply an exercise in ancient mythologies, this is actually something very crucial to the history of philosophy as well, right? And so I just want to show you a few quotes from some big names so you feel like you didn't waste your money in this class. You got some real philosophical content here, right? Schopenhauer beautifully once said, Arthur Schopenhauer once said, if a god made the world, I would not be that god, for its misery would tear my heart to shreds. It's gorgeous in the German, by the way, if you read it. Nietzsche famously, of course, is the ultimate philosopher of the loser god because he says, God's too decomposed, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. So that's interesting because God is killed here, but through betrayal by their own creation. And the methodologies, this is an interesting thing that almost never gets analyzed. Nietzsche doesn't mean this literally, of course. He means this epistemically, epocally, in the realm of perception, but which for him is equivalent to the realm of existence, right? Because we only see through our eyes. So if God is in the blind spot now, if God is in the erasure, it doesn't matter if there's an objective God or not, sort of swimming in the sky. The interesting question is, how did we kill this God? And if you notice, there's this beautiful rant of the madman in the Gay Science, where he does this whole rant, and it's in the form of questions. How did we wipe away sort of the horizon? With what sponge? He uses weird instruments. He speaks of the grave diggers who are burying God. He talks of the smell of the corpse of God. Nietzsche is very sly and subtle and intricate in his details here in ways that no other philosopher dare to be. He's throwing out, these are speculative trajectories of analysis, if you want to untie them, to ask how could the human kill the divine? And it's in the objects and the phenomena that he cites there that we could look into if we wanted to. Felix Guattari, of the famous pairing of Deleuze and Guattari that many rightfully adore, writes, "I am God most of the time when I don't have a headache, when I'm not slipping down some satanic slope." Interesting line from Guattari. Edmond Jabez, an Egyptian Jewish mystic, he's the writer that all your favorite philosophers know but don't quote enough. They don't tell you that they know. Jabez is one of Derrida's favorite writers. Blanchot knew him well. These are figures that relied on his insights, but he doesn't get his place at the table the way that he should. Absolutely phenomenal. If you could ever read the Book of Questions, by the way, particularly the fifth book. He wrote 5 books of questions. The fifth book, called the Book of Yael, absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning by Jabez. But anyway, he writes, "To kill God, the master of mirrors, the father of gardens, ungrained night of murder, I shall not extend the deadline." So he actually puts himself in the assassin's role. And he describes the night that he wants to kill God. And to kill God in his own territories, in the mirror, in the garden. Interesting idea. Paul Celan, the great post-Holocaust poet, who many of you know, writes, "The angels are dead and the Lord has gone blind in the region of Accra, and no one will guard for me those who have gone to their sleep and are resting." Again, a beautiful line by Celan. But the idea of the Lord has gone blind, interesting question. The great woman poet of Iran, right, can find a grave. This raises an interest, a God who is buried alive. And Persians have mythologies about God buried alive. And also anonymity. Gods who have lost their name. People have forgotten their names. That's a really interesting question for belief as well. And his code name writes, "If only we had not been a seed of creation." Did it cut out?
I think so, yeah.
But you caught me to the end of hopefully just a second ago. It's all right. Let's see if we can get back to it. I was just saying that this is a good way of just seeing that there are entire philosophical traditions and poetic traditions that have experimented with this topic in different ways. Now, this brings us to my favorite. The first mythological figure that I want to introduce to you is Nemesis. And I've done my deep studies on Nemesis. I've written on Nemesis recently. Absolutely amazing figure. a feminine god, a god of vengeance, divine vengeance. But her backstory, the reason I want to bring it up is because of the complexity of her family tree, which I don't think a philosopher of today necessarily. I try to be that philosopher on my best nights, but I don't think that a philosopher today has the imagination to create such complex and sophisticated and creative connections as what we're seeing here. So I'll go through it, but just so you know, Nemesis, today we think of a nemesis as a rival or an arch enemy, someone who instigates your downfall. But in the original form, she was actually more of an avenger, a vindicator, and a punisher. And nemesis as a word possesses a much more twisted etymology. It means literally the one who deals out shares of fortune or gives what is due. So this is why she's tied to justice in a very wrathful, angry sense, because she gives what you're owed, right? But just to give you her and her backstory, she has graven images from around 575 BCE, which means that there were very rare, very minor divinity cults associated with her, one divinity cult. She's always shown adorned with grand white wings. She's often blindfolded. She carries either a whip or a dagger or a rein of like a horse or a scale. She had cult grounds by the rivers of arcane temples at Rhamnus, which is in southern Attica. And the other group, you'd find this interesting, who worship Nemesis, the only other group, gladiator circles in Rome. Gladiators in Rome worship Nemesis. So this is interesting, fighters did. For our purposes, though, she's the progeny of an entire ominous bloodline of loser gods. So she is the daughter of Nyx, night, and Erebus, darkness. Interesting thing about Nyx is that she's one of the proto-genetic gods in the Greek, which is to say she's not born from anyone. She's immemorial. She's eternal. So even Zeus is not that, right? She's one of the original forces of the universe. So daughter of night and darkness, sister to Hypnos, sleep, Thanatos, death, Anadea, ruthlessness, Epiales, nightmare, Geras, old age. These are her brothers and sisters. Momus, scorn, Moros, doom, Aklis, death mist, Eris, discord, Alastor, blood feud, Eporia, want, Oisis, misery, Apate, deception, the Onoroi, who are the thousand gods of the sons of the dream, the Keres, who are the thousand daughter gods of cruel death, the Morai, the three sisters of the black fates, the Nosoi, plague, gods of plague, the Arai, gods of curses, the Menei, the gods of madness, Hesperides, evening and sunset, Euronymous. Euronymous is a really interesting figure to look into. He's just a flesh-eating titan. Again, plays no significant role in mythology. He's just there. He's a monster, basically. But here's where it gets really interesting too. Beyond all these brothers and sisters, each of whom is their own, you could write a book on each one of these concepts, on scorn, on doom, on blood feuds, on want, on misery, on deception. She's also the suspected mother to the Telkines. Now, who are they? They are island sorcerers who are the gods of envy, right? They have hybrid limbs of both wolves and fish. Don't ask, I didn't make it up, but they're half wolf, half fish. They have wicked eyes that are said to bring disaster. They're able to summon snowfall or rainstorms. They can condemn souls. I love this detail. The Telkines can condemn souls to endless levitation. It can just make you float forever. Or they can convert soil into barren wasteland. They pour deathly waters from their hands. And yet, this is the best part, they do serve one function. They are renowned as unparalleled metallurgists who can make ceremonial blades and cursed necklaces. So this is when they become instrumental. And so this is an entire hereditary legacy of a loser god, with each descendant carrying their own troublemaking essence that you can see. I think it's a wondrous thing. Now, I'll just throw a few fast ones at you. You've got Medusa, you guys know her, the snake-haired Gorgon, whose gaze can turn others into stone. I would just note that the great feminist manifesto of Hélène Cixous, great French thinker, is called The Laugh of the Medusa. and that's not an arbitrary choice why she chooses Medusa as the future of women's writing, of feminine writing. I think that's an interesting thing. And particularly the provocative laugh of Medusa herself. And so she's a figure who helps us contemplate the relationship between the loser and terror in certain ways, but other questions as well. To the bottom right, we have the sculpture of Arachne. Now, some of these are not gods, they're mythological sort of characters that are intertwined with the gods. So they're in that borderland because they're not human, everyday humans like us, but they come in contact with the gods directly. They're touched by gods. So that's why I put them in this classification for us to look at. So Arachne, she's similarly doomed to a zoomorphic fate. You guys know that probably. She sews these unparalleled woven linens and tapestries. It causes the gods to get jealous and sprinkle poison across her skull that mutates her into a spider. So that lets us contemplate the relation of the loser to both craft and jealousy. Remember, we just looked at the Telkines, who are great blade makers and necklace and jewelers. So here we have someone who can weave better than anyone else, also a loser god to a certain extent. Above Arachne, we have one of my absolute favorites, Limos. She's the goddess of starvation and hunger. And that's a sculpture of her. And I want to turn to a descriptive quote from Ovid's Metamorphosis about Limos, just to show you what kind of amazing specialized creativity comes from thinking about loser gods. So here we have, hopefully you can see it. Her hair was coarse, her face sallow, her eyes sunken, her lips crusted and white, her throat scaly with scurf. Her parchment skin revealed the bowels within. Beneath her hollow loins jutted her withered hips. Her sagging breast seemed hardly fastened to her ribs. Her stomach only a void, her joints wasted and huge, her knees like balls, her ankles grossly swollen. Limos does as Demeter commands. At midnight she enters Ersychthon's chamber, wraps the king in her arms, and breathes upon him, filling with herself his mouth and throat and lungs, and channeling through his hollow veins her craving emptiness. Thereafter, Ersychthon is filled with an unquenchable hunger, which ultimately drives him to eat himself. So there you go. There's Limos. Again, I would just note stylistically, in the age of autofiction that we exist in, I wouldn't put literary culture today even in the same stratosphere as a lot of the descriptive talents that we see 5,000 years ago even, or 3,000 years ago in this case. So from here, if we go to the bottom here, I know everybody likes to take a shot at Satan, the notorious slanderer, accuser, Lord of the Flies. What a great title. Obviously a figure of banishment. He's the derelict par excellence of the angelic ranks in the Judeo-Christian and Islamic tradition. By the way, it is an interesting thing for people who have endless idle time, and I've had that in my life at times, to go searching at what the slight differentiations in the mythologies of a figure like Satan are, even in the Judeo-Christian and Islamic tradition. They just have different approaches to that figure. But at any rate, he sometimes, I love the names too. Sometimes he's called the dragon, sometimes king of the bottomless pit, which ties the loser to intricate questions of evil, sin, contempt, desire, free will. But I like to just note a story I always tell sometimes. Some of you, sorry, I've heard this before, which is that Satan, as the ultimate thorn in God's side, is also weirdly tied in Christian and Islamic theology to light. So many of you know that his original name is Lucifer, which in the Christian reading is a symbol of the morning star. And in strands of Islamic mysticism, it's said that God created all the angels out of sunlight except for Satan, who was conjured out of moonlight. So I love that fact. But what some perhaps don't know is that the Satan persona is actually derived from an older loser god who I mentioned earlier, from the Egyptian archive named Set. Set is a wondrous figure to contemplate, again conceptually. He's known as the Lord of the Red Land. He's the god of the desert, storms, disorder, and foreigners. Great conceptual combination there too from the Egyptians. Desert, storms, disorder, and foreigners. He has an ambiguous head that does not correspond to any identifiable creature. He's able to collide genders. He becomes impregnated, interestingly enough. He's a usurper who violates the sacred border between life and death. and he's vanquished in his obsessive blood feud with the king god Horus. So he tries to kill Horus many times. He fails many times. He succeeds on a few occasions, deforms Horus as well. Nevertheless, the most absorbing detail about Set, who has a wicked temper and is enthralled by vendettas, is that I mentioned this earlier, saving the world. He serves an invaluable role in protecting Ra, the elder god of the sun, from a black water serpent named Apep. And he has this is a great thing. Every night, he takes a cosmic voyage, Set, in his, quote, boat of a million years. It's called the boat of a million years, which brings night and day to the world. So you can thank Set for bringing night and day. Each evening, he takes his vigilant stance at the helm of the ship. He fights off the serpent in order for time itself to move. So this is an unbelievable idea, that this loser god is the one, the god of the vendetta, the god of rage, the god of the chaos of the deserts and storms and foreigners, is the one that makes time move. And the reason that he's able to do this, why don't other gods protect Ra, the elder god of the sun, from this black water serpent, is because Set is the only one who is immune to the hypnotic powers of the serpent. The serpent can mesmerize and entrance every other god except Set. So the loser god has some exceptional immunity that I want us to look into and explore. And I would theorize that it's because of the lack of belief, that Set is not a god of belief, right? And this barrier then becomes, doesn't allow him to become spellbound. Why is this interesting? Because, and we'll get to this, how many of your futuristic dystopian movies feature an unwilling social outcast loner who has to save the world? Whether it's Blade Runner, whether it's The Matrix, whether it's Children of Men, almost all of your dystopian futuristic films have an apocalyptic savior who's a bum, who's a nobody, who's an angry type, who speaks in short sentences, who is not moral. And they're amoral, not immoral either, but definitely not moral. And if you watch the original Blade Runner, Harrison Ford's character, he's a police officer, but he hates the police. He never goes into the office. He dislikes authority, right? In that way, he hangs out in Chinatown eating noodles every night by himself, goes home to a bare apartment. This is your savior of the future, according to your cinematic unconscious. And it's come full circle because that's Set from the ancient world. So I love the fact that ancient pagan logics are finding their way back into a postmodern futural landscape, right? Just something to note. Because we are also the generation that is reeling from the slaughterhouses of ideology of the 20th century, right? All the isms that genocidally mutilated millions of people in the name of utopian promises and are still doing so. It's still on our watch that children are dying by the thousands in different parts of the world under bombs and bullets and sort of all that. And so, and in the name of ideologies which are vicious and promise perfect worlds at the expense of murdering humanity. And so maybe we're also looking for our first category or criterion of a savior would be someone who believes in nothing. I think that's a very interesting historical consciousness that we've entered into. And of course, you can talk about postmodernism and the suspicion of grand narratives and all of that. But I can even look to the art forms of our popular culture and see that it's thriving there. Like that's the intuition. The suspicion is that they're the only ones who could get beyond it because they are immune to ideology. So the fact that, but this is an interesting thing too, because Set is the ultimate fallen one, he falls for nothing in a sense. But he also, this is an interesting thing, Set and Satan are also always tied to the power of seduction. And I've talked about this before. One of Jean Baudrillard's last books in the last 20 years of his life was a great book on seduction. And I think it's an important thing for us to study only because we're in the age of consumer pleasure, right? Hyper pleasure seeking, where power structures and regimes condition us, absorb us, dominate us, not through fear, not through prohibition, not through thou shalt not anymore, but through pleasure. And so what is the only antidote to pleasure? An elder, more ancient, more complex version of the concept, which is seduction. It's not to become nihilistic and withdrawn from pleasure or to become ascetic, which is what every corporation now sells too. We'll do a detox together and do a weekly sort of corporate retreat to the mountains and everybody give up their phones. That is precisely part of the ideological schematic. But seduction is the only thing that can outrun and outdo these cheap kind of assembly line mall-born pleasures that pervade our technology as well. All those dings on your phone, right? By the way, if you want one of the greatest descriptions of Set, it's not even in the ancient Egyptian world, but in a modern tribal Libyan figure. He's part of the Tuareg tribe. Reza Negarestani and I both adore his literature. A figure named Ibrahim Alcone, who, if you haven't read The Bleeding of the Stone or The Seven Veils of Set, it's phenomenal. And in The Seven Veils of Set, Set is actually a character he develops over hundreds of pages. And this is what he says. So this is a scene where Set meets a young woman who's being chased by demons. And he says to her, he turned, but all he could see was the mouth of the vault. So he asked, who is following you? She pulled her wrap over her face before replying, the demon. Is he a demon from the spirit world? She nodded yes. Then he exclaimed in a defiant tone, ha, no demon from the spirit world will dare hide from me. He threatens me with his hateful fingers tipped with blue nails. Know that this is Set talking now. Know that to the demon master, every demon of the spirit world is nothing but a shadow. I'll pluck him from your world the way a thorn is plucked from the foot. Then he added as he crept toward her and took her in his arms, don't you know, water girl, that spirit world demon is one of my names. But he's a demon who frightens only to entertain and who does evil only to do good. So if you're intrigued by this, you can read The Seven Veils of Set by Ibrahim Alcone, who is a fascinating figure because he is, again, part of a Libyan subculture, a desert nomadic tribe called the Tuareg. He's one of the greatest philosophers of the desert that you could ever find. He hates cities. He went to Paris, received a PhD in philosophy, came back and became a tribal herder again and philosopher in Libya, where he lives to this day, I believe in his almost 90s at this point. So, all right, have to give a shout out to one of my favorites, the Great Cain. We don't have time to really get into the full depictions, but remember, Cain is the one who killed his brother and became marked upon his forehead, which makes us question the relation of the loser to spite and shame. The reason why Cain is so crucial to our thinking, by the way, is he's the first human. Right? Adam and Eve are born immortally in paradise through not biological reproduction, right? Not through kind of synthetic laboratory process, a rib cage mutation, right? Born out of dust turning into flesh. So these are miraculous properties of divine will. Cain is born the way that we are born. He's born outside the garden, right? He's the first human and he is a murderer. Right? And he is a figure of rage, and he is an accursed, banished loser, right, of the Bible. And it is very interesting to go and look at where he supposedly wandered off to. There are mythologies that say he's the first vampire, which I think is awesome. There are mythologies that say that he has a line you can read in the Bible all the way to Tubal-Cain, who's a figure who is the inventor of weapons, the first inventor of weapons in the Bible, so gives humanity blades. Interesting figure, Cain, right? And the mark is something that if you are interested, Michel Serres, S-E-R-R-E-S, is an absolutely stunning philosopher who doesn't get, again, enough attention to my mind, should be read all the time. And Michel Serres speaks about the mark in a book called The Five Senses. And the mark doesn't just mean a visual mark, it's also a texture. Obviously, it's like a scar. Those of you who have a scar, you may run your fingers on it and realize it's a crevice. It's a whole topography unto itself. It's interesting to see the way that the skin can crack or break and things like that. Well, that's Cain, and that's what he's hiding there, is the mark on the forehead. I would also notice that it's not a total coincidence that in an age where losers are sort of prized heroes of our storytelling on Netflix and wherever else, that one of the most popular writers of the past 20 or 30 years, José Saramago from Portugal, won the Nobel Prize. His last novel was titled Cain and is about Cain. Now, in his version, Cain becomes he retells the story of Cain, because we really don't have an aftermath in the Bible to what happens to Cain after he's punished by God for killing his brother. But so Saramago fills in the gaps of storytelling, and Cain this is a fascinating thing, in his book becomes a kind of time-traveling anti-hero who shows up at all the major moments of the Bible to fix things when they're going wrong. So it's interesting. He just stumbles upon Abraham about to kill his son, and the angel Gabriel is supposed to fly down and stop him, but Gabriel is napping or something and is late, so he stops him. So basically, Cain actually saves the world also all the time, saves the covenant, holds it together, even though he despises God. But the reason you find out at the end, I'm going to spoil it for you. You can mute me for a second if you want. But the reason is because he doesn't want God's creation to fail by accident or by incompetence of his angels. He wants to do the deed himself. So at the end, he goes to Noah, he finds Noah, he seduces Noah and his wife to allow him to be on the ship, and then one by one he throws every creature, including all of Noah's children, into the water. It's the ultimate revenge story. And creation stops there. And in the end of Saramago's version, he wrote it only a year before he died, interestingly. And I don't know if he would have won the Nobel Prize if he had written it before the Nobel Prize was given to him, because it's very controversial. At the end, it's just God and Cain arguing for eternity. They're the only ones left in existence. Because Noah kills himself in despair. He throws himself in the water after his wife, children, and all the animals. So there's no species. There's no life on earth. It's a pure wasteland scenario, eternal after. But God is also can't take back the fact that he has immortally cursed Cain. Cain will live forever too. So they're just bickering and yelling at each other for all eternity in an empty cosmos. It's kind of awesome. And Adonis, who I read to you earlier, the Syrian poet, he also famously said once in Arabic, "And I let Cain be proud of his grandson." So he sees himself as part of the bloodline of Cain. Now, I'm almost done, but I got to give a shout out to another great figure of Pandora, whose famous box we know releases all negative experiences into existence: war, brutality, sickness, betrayal. Way before we have thinkers of the negative in philosophy, we have the myth of Pandora, right? And the origin story I love the fact that the origin story of all the radical negativity of our universe, of our existence, of being, right? Illness, suffering, betrayal, right? Disappointment. It all comes from curiosity. And curiosity not towards metaphysical explanation or great Hegelian searches for the absolute, but a box, a little golden box, childlike almost, right? The irresistible urge to see what's inside the box, to chase a mystery. I think that's unbelievable. I think it's a wonderful, I think it's a better explanation of the radical negativity of existence, far more than any religious or philosophical explanation that I've heard since, to be honest with you. Her name, by the way, Pandora, translates as either the all-gifted or all-giving. And I love the duality of that. The Greeks are slippery for a reason in their etymologies, because they like to have these. She's both the all-gifted because she's talented in many ways, but she's also the one who gives all to us. And all-giving here is not a benevolent thing. All giving literally means everything, right? And totality here is a curse state, is a loser state then, right? Her title in the ancient Greek, her titles include Kelon Kakos, which means beautiful evil, and Antipyros, which means to pay for fire. Cool, no? Name to pay for fire. She is an art. This is the best part. Why am I bringing this up? All of you guys who are so into like Ex Machina, which is a great contemporary film, terrific, and who are interested in like the femininity and the gender issues surrounding Siri and women's role in technology, for instance. Women have always been tied to technology and to doomsday technologies in particular. Eve and the apple, Pandora and the box, right? The term operator, right? The first operators were women who did sort of telecorrespondence, right? The buyers of gadgets, by the way, even in the most patriarchal Western world of the 1940s and 50s, all advertisement of technological gadgets, whether it was blenders or refrigerators or anything but the car, was geared towards women. Right? So women have, and the term computer, by the way, is also a term that was used first for women who were telephone operators. So interesting thing. And also sometimes stenographers in trial cases, women who would type, were typists. So the interesting thing about Pandora, why do I bring it up? She is an artificially invented woman in the mythology. She's not a human-born woman. She is invented as a woman of charms who is sent as a penalty to the human race for receiving Prometheus' stolen gift of fire. So a lot of you don't know this, but Prometheus has a stupid brother. Prometheus has foresight. His brother only has hindsight, meaning he figures things out too late, which may be the god of our era, by the way. Right? We also learn things too late, whether it's about ecology or it's about war or it's about a number of things. We could say we're also a lineage of that ignorant brother who's always blind to the present. But she's sent then to punish Prometheus's brother for Prometheus's violation. She does share an entwined narrative with Eve, but she is, I love the fact, again, she's an artificially invented woman just meant to do this one awful thing. And so she's also part of the first breaker of laws and covenants and a figure of insatiability like Eve, who bites the apple in paradise and costs us everything, burdening us with affliction, mortality, right? Aging. But if you remember, they also both make knowledge itself possible. So if you all consider yourselves part of a philosophical tradition, you can thank Pandora and Eve because they release knowledge into the world. There is no knowing before them. Getting outside of the Western tradition, you have Xolotl and Aipaloovik. These are Xolotl was the Aztec god of lightning, fire, and death. He's also considered to be the god of twins, diseases, deformities, and misfortune. He serves as a guide for the souls of the dead as they pass through the 9 layers of the underworld. In Inuit mythology, Aipaloovik is often considered the worst god. He's an evil sea god who's associated with death and destruction. He's a threat to fishermen. He's considered the opposite of the benevolent sea goddess Anguta. Now, that's an interesting thing. The reason I bring that up is because sometimes the loser god is a twin. And I'm really interested in the cult of twins that was in ancient thinking as well, right? You can think, to me, actually exploring, I don't want to keep taking shots at Enlightenment philosophy, but if you really got deep into the threads of the cult of twins, you would find a prototype of the dialectic that to me is far more sophisticated and intriguing than what modern philosophers constructed. Okay, so it's just interesting to note that that Aipaloovik, the Inuit god of the evil sea god, is a twin to the benevolent sea goddess. He flips boats, by the way, as well. There are things, I mean, we could go on forever. Wendigos are evil spirits of Native American tribes who tempt you into cannibalism, just meaning that, and they feed through those who you eat. It's weird. They're often described as having gaunt human-like appearances, blah, 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 blah. And they go on and on and on. There's Apuch, who's the Mayan god of death. You guys should read the Mayans, god of death, darkness, and disaster, also associated with the moon. And you can go on and on and on with these. I'm going to skip over all of the more heinous things that Apuch does in the Mayan, but he's a human with an owl's head and a skeleton-like body adorned with bells. These are details for me that are as rich as the intellectual questions. Why they would decide to choose adorning them with bells, why an owl's head, why a skeletal torso. Really interesting, right? Okay. Let's see. Let me just see. Okay. We have gambling odds. To the left is one of the most ancient, by the way, games. It's an Egyptian game board. For the Aztecs, there's the flower prince, Xolotl, who's a god who rules over the finer luxuries of life, music, art, poetry, yet also games of wagering. I say this because I know that half of you are visual artists in the room, which is great, or musicians, or maybe you write poetry. Notice that in the ancient Aztec mythologies, that's tied to gambling, right? But interestingly, his job is not only to help gamblers, but to punish those who indulge to the point of depraved excess. The term for that is addiction. So it's interesting that they actually are the guardian of the balance between hedonistic pleasure and addictive pleasure. Right? They punish addiction, which is an interesting thing to think about. The Navajo tribe has a god force known as Naholpi, who wore a turquoise necklace. And this is an interesting one because it's his lucky charm. Eventually, he goes corrupt and uses his bets to enslave human worshippers. So again, a god of gambling who uses gambling to enslave. The devil also does this, makes wagers, right? The Chinese, that's on the right, personify the gambling god in the form of a young boy named Nezha, who committed suicide and was reanimated and now carries a fire-pointed spear that he uses to subvert tyrannical structures of authority. He is also believed to be responsible for the winners and losers of the lottery. So in contemporary popular Chinese culture today, many people who play the lottery in China refer to Nezha, right? They make some type of oath to Nezha. Interestingly, though, he's also considered a revolutionary god. And I will just note that the Chinese government does not allow any iconographic depictions of Nezha because he's considered a revolutionary. Interestingly enough, for a revolutionary government. Once. You got Papa Legba in Caribbean voodoo practices. He's usually found loitering around doorways, gates, or crossroads. He speaks every language in existence. And according to rumors, if you're ever playing cards, you can call on Papa Legba to get you a winning hand by offering him a drink. You have to buy Papa Legba a drink at the table and leave it there, interestingly enough. And he'll give you a good thing, or you have to answer one of his riddles. Okay? I have talked about this elsewhere, so I won't talk about it here. Talk about loser goddesses. Three of the most amazing figures of surrealism for me were three women painters, visual artists, who were systematically, to some extent, exiled from surrealism because it was too patriarchal. You have Leonora Carrington, you have Ethel Colquhoun, and you have Remedios Varo. All three of them spent time in Mexico as a kind of anti-headquarters to Paris. And fascinatingly, all three of them devised tarot card decks. And I like this very much because tarot cards are kind of loser gods in a way, right? They're not, it's not the main gods that are on there. They're weird forces of destiny who have this sort of double-sided possibility of risk that could be every card in tarot could imply reward or devastation. So it's a paradoxical way of looking at the world and a pendulum that can swing to the extremes. So anyway, that's just something there. And if we really wanted to get into it, you can get into great other visual artists. Belkis Ayan, the Cuban, she's an amazing Cuban. She committed suicide very young, tragically, but she was interested in a secret society called the Abakua, and she creates these amazing prints of devious silhouettes of the other side and their rituals. So that's Belkis Ayan's work, who I would definitely recommend looking at. She's a great Cuban printmaker who was interested in this long-lost secret society of loser gods. More contemporary, you have Allison Janae Hamilton, who's from the American South, African-American. she has a thing about haints, a whole collection on haints at the swamp, which is a kind of demigod-like figure of antlers, horns, animal hides, who live in the bayou and swamp cultures of the American South. They often have godlike abilities, but they're also doomed in a certain way to their own cyclicality. One of my favorite visual artists of all time, Alfred Cuban, who is the first illustrator of Kafka's work and certain other ones. He's famous for his weird gods as well. You can look at Manfred Kielnhofer, his Guardians of Time, where he kind of just stages these impromptu figures around the world, these weird loser gods of time who show up in the middle of cities at night when he leaves them there. Or Lin Tian Mao's exhibition Here or There. She has, I think, 6 figures who are different looking like this. These ethereal beings who hover in between the planes of presence and absence, and we don't know what they're doing there exactly. One of the greatest ways of looking at loser gods also is Butoh dance. I mention it all the time. It's a performance of the absolute loser in the face of nuclear catastrophe. This is an avant-garde dance ritual of Japan. Their bodies are coated in white debris. They put clay, chalk, and powder. They writhe and they tremble. If you've never seen Butoh dancing before, it's not an ancient dance form. It is a post-nuclear bomb Japanese dance form. And it's supposed to, dancers are relearning motion itself, the dynamics of motion itself. That's why they look in unfamiliar ways at their own limbs, because they've lost everything in the atomic blast cloud of that one split second. Okay? And again, I just mentioning to you earlier that you have kind of loser god, unwilling apocalypse saviors that we see in film and literature, this lone wolf anti-hero who has to rescue humanity from certain destruction while seemingly uninvested themselves in the grand saga. Now, the only thing that I want to say more right now is what we are going to look for going forward. One of the things. So what is there are other things that I could get into, but I don't want to exactly get into it right now. So there's a writer, the readings for this seminar, just to have some back readings that are not exactly immediately relevant to your assignments. Your assignments every week are to find a loser god from some tradition and to come ready to discuss whatever features of them, physical, existential, their powers, their origin stories, and to do a 2-minute, no more than 2 minutes, because we got to get through everybody, a 2-minute presentation of the most captivating and weird details that you can find about them. Okay? But the readings that I've assigned are from a figure who some of you may know, some of you may not, Par Lagerkvist. Par Lagerkvist is a Nobel Prize winning author of the 1950s and 60s, but not, again, a hugely read figure, weirdly enough. Lagerkvist is very interested in damned stories of damned characters. So one of the first ones, I'm going to tell you the 3 because you're going to read them over 3 weeks. So you can read, I've scanned all 3 books for you. You can read and just jump around. But if I give you a little bit of the backstory, you don't have to read the whole plot. You can just go looking for cool moments and quotes, because much of his writing are just long existential descriptions, and it's not exactly the plot. So the first book that I mentioned is The Sibyl. It's written in 1956. Story begins with a traveler who's seeking shelter from a storm. He arrives at the edge of this world where an old woman lives alone in the mountains. She's in a cave, and over the course of the night, he tells his story and she tells her story. So he starts by, this is the figure from the Bible that's later called the Wandering Jew. It's a condemned figure who he's condemned for all eternity to be cursed, to feel nothing, to love nothing, because he laughed at Christ while Christ was being brought to the crucifixion. And he didn't know it's Christ. He just thought it was some poor condemned soul, and he had a sadistic moment where he laughed, and he didn't allow him to rest his head on his house. while he was carrying the cross. So then all of a sudden this guy is crucified and he notices that he doesn't feel anything. He's not happy when he holds his kid. He's not happy when he sees his wife. He doesn't care about his business or his house anymore. And he's going in search of the reasons for this. And the more where does he go? He goes to the oracle at Delphi. So a more pagan recourse to try and find an answer. And the oracles at Delphi say the only person who can maybe solve this riddle of what has happened to you is a woman called the Sibyl. She used to be the oracle at Delphi and she was banished and cursed by the god, and so the god of the temple, and so you should go to her. So you notice the first quote is he says, he passed me by and I laughed. That was all. So that's how it starts. He tells her that about Christ. The meeting's not coincidental, obviously. They're both outcasts of divine judgment. They're both cursed by a god or a god-man. And what unites them is not faith, but abandonment. So she starts to tell that she was once the Sibyl of Delphi. She was chosen by Apollo to serve as his mouthpiece. She's a young and innocent woman. And the first experience that she has is in a pit with all this weird incense. She's inhaling and all of that. And she's overwhelmed by the divine force. She just says it this way, when he came into me, I was not myself, he was everything. So she goes into these paroxysms, these seizures, and she talks in tongues and all that. It's very violent, trance-like states. They're ecstatic but terrifying. And the more she does it, the more she's worshipped by the people, but the more she becomes estranged from everyone. They revere but fear her. Even the priesthood doesn't talk to her, and she becomes increasingly isolated. And so this gift of her prophecy, it doesn't elevate her, it destroys her ability to live among others, right? But what that happens is that because of this extreme isolation, she falls in love with an amputated, a soldier with an amputated arm, a one-armed man. She has an affair with him, and then the god punishes him by drowning him in the same river. She then gets pregnant. It's very ambiguous in the story whether it's the one-armed man's child, she doesn't know herself, or the god's child, right? By the way, just to get a little bit gross, the god does manifest as a goat in the pit and has relations with her. So the weird thing is the child is born. She says, I thought he was a god's child, but he was not. He was only a child. This child doesn't speak. The child has a weird grin on his face always, like he knows some cosmic joke that he's not telling anybody. He's very ambiguous. You suspect that he is the child of the god of the temple, but very quickly, the community kills him. So she says they killed him because he was not like other children, because he would not play with them. When that happens, she then decides to go into the mountains. She lives in a cave. She banishes herself. Her ecstatic visions cease. She's cast out of the temple. She's no longer possessed by the god, but she's not free of him. Her punishment is to remain there in exile in the cave. So, and to grieve over her dead child. Their philosophy is basically that the gods are arbitrary and cruel, right? So if you look at the last lines there, she says, the god chooses his instruments and breaks them when he is done. She says, the gods are not just, they are merely gods. And she says, the gods are silent, and so am I. So this is a fascinating thing. Not only is she the ultimate loser, the great accursed one, she goes from being the chosen one, the most elevated, to the lowest, right? But still powerful in many ways. But to a final philosophical position that loser God is redundant. There are only loser gods. All gods are losers by definition, according to her. Right? The gods are not just, they are merely gods. It's almost by default, it's a de facto supremacy that they have. It's unearned, it's unmerited, it's unwarranted, it has no real rhyme or reason, it's just circumstantial. So this is an interesting thing for a culture of reality TV, where we now measure fame by spontaneous combustion of hyperexposure for no good reason. You don't have to be a talented actress or actor. You don't have to be, this is the Kardashian effect. You don't have to be particularly anything. You can also be completely artificially sort of constructed and enhanced and still be perfectly accepted into the realm of status and beauty and all that. And this is an ancient conception of that. The gods are not just, they're merely gods. They're just in the right place at the right time. They're born on the other side of the celestial divide. They're lucky. And they use their good fortune to do unjust things, arbitrary things, cruel things. Now, the next figure, or the next book that I wanted to mention, then he has the book Barabbas. Some of you may not know Barabbas. This is also by Paralogicfist. Barabbas was the figure who, so this, I don't want to get into the whole thing, but basically, before Christ is crucified, the Roman general, Pontius Pilate, gives the crowds who are hungry for Christ's blood, gives them an opportunity to not kill him. If you guys watch The Last Temptation of Christ by Scorsese, Pontius Pilate is played beautifully by David Bowie, interestingly enough. So, but at any rate, Pontius Pilate goes before the crowds and says, I'll give you one last chance to show mercy. I will not execute someone if you choose them. He wants them to choose Jesus, it's assumed. Or he's giving them an out to choose Jesus. And instead, just out of spite for Christ, they choose Barabbas, who's a murderer, who's going to be crucified as well. And they get him off the hook. Well, what's awesome about this is that Barabbas doesn't get any representation beyond that in the Bible. It's all about JC, and his story, his saga, his resurrection. But what happens to Barabbas, who gets off the hook of a murder charge and goes wandering beyond that point, right? And he, we find out, is also cursed. Why is he cursed? So first thing is to know, who is Barabbas? What I like about this text is he's not an exceptional, exemplary figure at all. He's neither noble nor brilliant. He's kind of just a thuggish, crude, everyday man. A tough kind of guy from rough circumstances, but nothing special about him whatsoever, right? So he's endowed with no great qualities by Paralogicfist story. You see the first quote, his soul was like tempted by this question. See, he makes a mistake. He's freed from prison. His chains are taken off just because they didn't want to give that mercy to Christ. And he decides to attend the crucifixion. And he stares into the eyes of Christ. And that's bad for him. Because then he starts having existential questions. Why had he, Barabbas, been chosen, he who was unworthy? So now he starts contemplating this. And it's very dangerous when an everyday person, a philosopher, it's very dangerous when a philosopher starts thinking philosophically. Never mind a non-philosopher starts asking great philosophical questions. But it's even better when they do, because we get to this then. So the first thing is that just like the figure in the Sibyl, looking in his eyes is a curse. Christ curses him. So it is though he had been marked in some inexplicable way, as though the man who had died in his place had left his mark on him. He felt no remorse, but he was unable to shake off the memory of the dead man's eyes. Right? So he stares into the eyes of Christ at the moment that he loses, and now he walks around in asking profound questions about guilt, grace, belief, salvation. It's cool because this story is both minimalist and cosmic. Barabbas is the ultimate minimalist character. He doesn't even wear a shirt, by the way. Right? He just walks around bare-chested everywhere to show how raw he is. But he's asking cosmic questions, which interestingly, this is what's cool. The universe gets shown to him like a bare-chested, shirtless, brutal, unlettered universe. The macrocosm and the microcosm, as the Hermetics say, collide here. Barabbas is actually a good reflection of what the God space looks like, the metaphysical, right? So we go further. He's a coarse and violent man, Barabbas. Remember, he's a murderer. He's a thief too. He's bewildered by his sudden release. He gets haunted by the figure of Jesus, a man he can't understand, but he doesn't understand, but can't forget. He watches the crucifixion on the Mount of Golgotha. He's not moved to belief by it. Great. This is beautiful by Largabis. He has no spiritual awakening, no redemptive arc whatsoever, right, at this point. He's just disturbed by witnessing, right? He doesn't know what, he's caught in the outer orbit of revelation. Doesn't know what to make of it. So he begins a journey for the rest of his life. seeking something he can't understand. Why was he chosen to live? Who was this man who died in his place? He meets a Christian woman who gets stoned to death for believing in Christ. And that's where you see that next quote. Why had she spoken that name as though it were her own life? This makes no sense to a kind of rough guy whose street smarts tell him that you got to save yourself. The idea of dying for another is something impossible for him to fathom right now. And the fact that she speaks Christ's name with such passion, even though it's a total abstraction and a stranger, is something he can't understand, right? So that first encounter when he meets the woman stoned to death for believing in Christ, it jars him and he wants to pray. And he writes, he tried to pray, but he did not know what to say. He had no words, no thoughts, only a longing. This is very interesting because if you could look at a whole, not to give you guys cool dissertation topics, but you could do a dissertation on people who say they couldn't pray. So interestingly, do you guys know this was the crisis moment for Malcolm X? Malcolm X in prison, when he was converting to Islam, the Nation of Islam, which has its own very strange storytelling mechanisms and all of that, and civilizational mythologies and the kings of queens of Africa and all of these things that he talks about. Malcolm X studied very closely everything, but he had a great deal of trouble bending his knees into a supplicant's position and praying. And famously, he said the only time he had ever bent his knees, he was taught always to stand up proud, because when you are persecuted and oppressed, you don't bend at the knee. You don't submit or subjugate yourself, right? You become a fighter to a great extent. So he couldn't bring himself to do that. And the only way he could do it was to remember that the only time that he ever prayed was, or I'm sorry, the only time he ever went on his knees was when he picked locks to steal into people's houses, to break into people's houses. And that metaphor or that practice helped him do it. So he used a criminal act to get himself to be able to do a sacred gesture, which I think is a fascinating paradox. But if you read Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke, the great Austrian poet, he also has an amazing poem called Lament, where it starts out, everything is far and long gone by. I think something terrible was said in the car that just passed. I mean, it's just this weird thing. The whole world seems awful. And at one line, he says, I would like to pray. Meaning it's impossible, but he'd like to pray. Right? In this story, Barabbas, in this novel, after this, he's arrested again and he's sent to the mines to work, where he meets a very gentle Christian slave named Sahak. They become friends, and it's the most sentimental part of the novel. They're chained together while they work, and Sahak's faith in Christ stirs something in Barabbas. He's still skeptical. He's still not capable of belief, but they're chained together, and he ends up being executed. Sahak is executed for his faith, and then Barabbas feels utterly alone. He's eventually freed by a Roman official who finds him interesting because he wanders the world like a ghost. But his torment then is becoming more and more existential. And you see him say things like, he could not believe, it was not given to him believe. He looked up into the black sky, no sign was given him. This is really interesting because if you look at ancient monotheism, the Old Testament God is not a universal God that Christian turns him into, the Christianity turns him into. He is a tribal God of a chosen tribe. He's a local God, right? And in fact, he goes to war with other gods, like Pharaoh's gods and all that, right? And in fact, he says things like, thou shalt have no other gods before me, which assumes there are other gods. You follow? So this is very interesting because what it means is that just like it means that individuals can be chosen for belief or not chosen, which is not a Christian or Islamic idea, which is more universal, right? So Barabbas is just unlucky that he's not part of the club, right? He's not admitted. He's not a member of the club of belief. It's assumed that the reason why Sahak and that woman are able to give themselves up to Christ and forsake themselves, martyrs, is not from some great accomplishment, but some inborn mechanism that the God force has instilled in them and deprived Barabbas of. he has a gap or a lack or a defective circuitry of metaphysical, sort of metaphysical bonding that the others have. Anyway, and he does end up getting killed in the end. Interestingly, because he's mistaken as a Christian. So he does die in the novel at the end because they mistake him that he is a Christian. He neither confirms it nor denies it. Interestingly. So the last one I just want to bring up to you, and now you've got a guided tour of these three novels, is The Dwarf. This is his earliest. So this, I went in backwards order. The Sibyl is 1956, Barabbas is 1950, and The Dwarf is written in 1944. And you guys know what's happening in 1944 in the world and particularly in Europe. It's not about that at all. The novel is an allegory of the psychological descent into hatred, cruelty, and moral corruption of a dwarf. There's a dwarf narrator who is small in stature, but he is massive in his potential for malevolence. So he's a very petty and evil character. You're in an unnamed Renaissance Italian city. The narrator, the dwarf, is in the service of Prince Leonardo, a tyrant who wraps himself in like disguises of being artistic and scientific and politically refined, but really he's a sadist deep down, and he uses the dwarf as his agent of his sadism. So the very first line of the book is the first quote there. I hate everyone. I am not like other men. I am a dwarf. That's the first line, right? Now, you're going to be questioning about who is this next line. He is a great man, da, 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 da. That is not the prince. The dwarf disdains the prince, actually. Does not love the prince. The dwarf doesn't love the prince because he doesn't love anything. He hates love, hates beauty, hates compassion, hates joy. He's a servant of the prince's darkness, his dark side. He admires cruelty, punishment, and war. He has a lot of influence in the court, but it's a hidden influence. He lurks behind all of the court's worst decisions. He resents humanism, science, and any moral virtue. Now, here's where it gets cool. Who's this figure? He's a great man. His soul is a desert. He is a thinker. He thinks about death. Leonardo da Vinci. There is an inventor in the story in the court named Leonardo. He's clearly a da Vinci-like figure because he's a genius who's torn between idealism but a service to tyranny. He gets his money for his experiments from the prince. And the prince, just like, I don't know if you guys know this, but I teach at a college that's only 7 minutes from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is probably the leading engineering school on the planet, right? Everyone wants to go to MIT from everywhere in the world who wants to be an engineer. Most of their contracts, and if you go in the MIT Media Lab, you'll notice that they have these fascinating research groups that are confidential, top secret, but they have some descriptions of what they do, and they vary from really technical things like cyborgs that they're working on to immortality but all the way to weird things like lifelong kindergarten and stuff like that. Their number one funding comes from the CIA. Most of their contracts come from the CIA or from the National Security Agency, right? This is an old game, right? If you want patronage to do really high-tech, sort of experimental, extreme innovation, you're going to have to also build war machines. So this Leonardo figure, this Da Vinci-like figure in The Dwarf by Lagerkvist, he loves beauty. He's a great painter, but he also creates war machines for the prince. Devastating, awful war machines. And the dwarf worships him for this. And he doesn't care about his paintings. He loves his machines. So that's why he says he's a great man. His soul is a desert. He's a thinker. He thinks about death. So anyway, it's Machiavellian. The dwarf helps the prince poison his allies, torture his enemies, manipulate his wife, cause scandal and tragedy all over that. He's an agent of vengeance, poisoning, spying. He sows chaos in the shadows. And the only thing he admires in the world are the machines of Leonardo. He says, love thy neighbor, that is the vilest of all commandments. These are just lines from the dwarf at different points. Now I am back in my hole. Here I belong. I shall never leave it again. I am the prince's shadow. I know what he desires. They kissed with their mouths full of lies. Lust is worse than murder. He hates whenever he sees acts of passion. I do not want forgiveness. I want to endure. They will never understand me. I am too near them. These are great philosophical lines by Lagerkvist that I've extracted for all of you. And he writes in the end, I am always here in the dark where I belong. Okay? So this is just a tour of 3 novels by sometimes a little-known author who also deals with 3 kind of ultimate losers, the Sibyl, Barabbas, and the dwarf, all 3 of whom are tied to gods that are unjust. So I will leave it at that. And again, I've scanned all 3 of those books for all of you, so you can read them on your own if you want to, or read portions of them, find passages from them in the coming weeks if you'd like. Those are going to be our readings. But again, your assignments are to go chasing loser gods. So we're going to start from next week, where you go and discover whichever one you can. Again, there's no limits or particular standards or parameters to what you uncover. Just come ready with 2 minutes. If you can bring visual images, great, perfect, because sometimes the iconography reveals things that are really phenomenal, and whatever you want to talk about regarding those figures. Now, at this point, we have, let's see here, time for questions. I don't want to do introductions and all of that because, one, I know many of you, but I'll learn you all. We'll talk in the next class and I'll get to know you through your creativity and through your things. So we'll talk then. How about questions? Anything come to mind or any discussion points or impressions you want to raise? I fling it open to you.
Hi, Professor. My name is Gia Lepino. I had a question about the difference between seduction and pleasure. I know you just kind of skimmed over that, but could you dive a little bit deeper? Thank you.
Oh, that's a great one. You know, the example I often give, and sorry to Saej and James and a few others who've been in the game with me a number of times, you may have heard me give this example before. But for me, one of the great tensions in the history of American literature, and I don't often go to American literature, but is the difference between Gatsby in The Great Gatsby and Ahab in Moby Dick. So Gatsby is a pure manipulator of the existing world of style and status. So he learns, he's a poor kid who's an imposter, fake aristocrat, right? He's pretending to be old money. Hello, can you hear? Hello, can you hear again? Are we back now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that, Jim. So I was going to say that Gatsby is a figure who studies and he's an imposter aristocrat. So he studies and learns already what people think is beautiful and sort of gives them pleasure. So he hosts these extravagant parties at his mansion. It's full of champagne, the music of the day. He wears the nicest suits. Basically, he's just an extreme magnified version of what is already considered the ultimate sort of style. So he's a highly manipulative, highly precise, diabolically constructed figure. That is pleasure, right? Because he learns the codes and he masters the codes. Ahab is a weirdo. Oh, hello everyone. Can you hear again? I'm gonna try and get into another space to see if I can remedy this. Hold on 1 second here. Give me 1 second here. I think this will help with the. Okay. I think we have a more stable connection now. So what I was going to say was Ahab is this weird, eccentric character. He's got physical deformities. He's got one eye missing. He's got one leg, I think, or arm missing. He's full of scars. He's ugly beyond belief by conventional standards. So he's the opposite of Gatsby. He's not graceful, but he is this irresistible whirlpool of seduction. Everyone wants to follow him. This crew wants to follow him to the depths of the ocean, the blackest waters, to chase a white whale to their own death. Right? They go on a suicide mission. And his madness, for some reason, is an ultimate sort of ultimate seductive force, attractive force to them. So for me, the difference is that pleasure is often a known quantity. Now, I'm abandoning here all the complexities of what psychoanalysis said about pleasure. There are lots of readings of pleasure from Freud, from Lacan, from Jung even. There are lots of figures who've said different things. Sabina Spielrein talks about death drive and pleasure in really interesting ways. But pleasure in terms of what I was mentioning, like materialistic, contemporary consumer pleasure, is you want the iPhone 15, 16, 17. You want the new and improved. You don't want radical shock, right? You don't want horror. You don't want awe. You don't want sort of that. But the figure of seduction precisely is that. They're an outlier. They're a novelty. They're a one of a kind. Think in an assembly manufactured world of infinite reproducibility, where I break this, I can just go get another one. I can go get a million of them. Seduction is like that ancient artifact you would find in the bazaars of the Middle East, where there's only one in the whole world like it, right? So it's irreplaceable. So for me, and how a figure becomes that, again, there are writers who I would qualify that way. There are writers who, and this is something, Gia, I'll just say, I mean, not to, I don't care so much always about talking about Western philosophy, but I always give this credit to Nietzsche, that he is the one philosopher who is impossible to imitate. And all imitations are horrible, horribly done. They sound terrible, right? Whereas it is very easy. I have met tens of Heideggerians and Derridians and Freudians who all sound like their masters, right? Hegelians too. Sorry for the Hegelians in the room. You all sound like Hegel, right? It's very easy to imprint yourself and ventriloquate the tongue of the master. But Nietzsche, it just comes out weird. And even, I always mention this, so sorry to those who I'm repeating myself, but the whole 20th century is full of great, masterful philosophers who all think they're Nietzschean, and they don't sound anything like him. So Heidegger is a Nietzschean. He writes 4 700-page volumes on Nietzsche. Bataille is Nietzschean. Deleuze is Nietzschean. Derrida claims he's the first deconstructionist. Jung says he's the first psychoanalyst. Sartre says he's the first existentialist. Camus loves Nietzsche the most. Baudrillard loves Nietzsche the most. Kafka loves Nietzsche the most. Artaud loves Nietzsche the most. None of them sound like him. Impossible to imitate. So for me, that's seduction, right? It's the thing that is highly isolated, which is why it's interesting that most of the gods who are loser gods don't have children. They're non-reproductive gods. And when they do, like Nemesis does have that race of the Telkines, they're these island hybrid freaks who really don't share any resemblance to their mother either. They're wolfish gods. They don't look like her. They don't carry on any of her heredity. I think Donna Haraway would be really interested in this too, because she's always really interested in cutting sort of lineages and reproducibility in that way. So I hope that answers to some extent, just a little bit. But yeah, I'd also say there are techniques of seduction. So if you look, last thing I'll just say is, if you look at really scary like folklore from small towns, small villages, particularly whether it's in Latin America or South America or the Middle East or Africa or East Asia, you look in these places which have ancient folklores or long-lasting folklores about swamp witches or creatures in the hills and stuff like that. Often they tell them to children. They're usually narrated by old women in these places, right? and all that, what you'll notice is that half of them, these devouring creatures who want to eat you, half of them use seduction to do so. So even in fairy tales, some of them pounce on you and they devour you. They're just attack mode. They're predatory. But many of them, even in fairy tales, like Hansel and Gretel, they use, this like candy house the witch has to lure them in. So this is an interesting question of techniques too. They're even, and Satan is one of these, they're even beautiful, or really hideous, ugly gods who can look beautiful, right? Or speak beautifully for a temporary until they reveal themselves. So those are old stories in folklore too, right? Some witch who can appear beautiful, or some creature that can appear beautiful until they unmask themselves. So those are acts of seduction as well. And that's a really interesting one that's in fairy tale literature, how the kids often are attracted to the very thing that wants to eat them. Cool. Sorry, I hope that answers a little bit there. Well, Maria, you can feel free to call on people if you'd like. Whoever you saw first, either it's Frida or Kiki or whoever. Frida, you want to go ahead, please?
Yeah, I can go ahead.
Sure.
I actually just wanted to talk a little bit about the legacy of Xolotl, the forgotten god, basically because Xolotl is a skeleton with like a dog face. So one of the manifestation of Xolotl is the Xoloescuincle, which is, I think you call it the hairless Mexican dog. And then, so basically, we call them Xolos, but their full name is Xoloescuincle, which is a manifestation of Xolotl. And basically, every family had a Xoloescuincle because you needed a guide through the underworld. So you had to have a dog who will guide you to the underworld. And they also used to eat them, but they ate the ones that had white spots on them, because they're like ones that are like totally dark, and there are ones that had like white spots, because it was said by the Aztecs that the ones with spots already went to the underworld and came back. And they can trick you because they were already there. So they were the ones that were eaten because of the skin. And so I do think, especially in the Mexican metropolitan area, we are very dog obsessed. Like every single family has a dog, because I think it comes from this tradition of having a guardian of the underworld.
I love that. That's brilliant. And feel free to elaborate on this if you want next class, if that's one of the figures that you want to get into, because I've written on, these are called psychopomps in the term for it, right? Which are typically animals. I hate the fact that we are in this humanist modern era where psychopomps have now become human. So now it's your grandma or your grandfather who you see the light and they guide you. In every civilization throughout history before the modern age, it was animals. And this is, you open up, Frida, a really brilliant insight into the fact that because so many of these gods, the loser gods, are going to be cursed by anthropomorphic gods, they are going to align with animality more and more. Just like witches align with animality, just like vampires align with animality, or werewolves align with animality, right? So that's a great thing to mention. Another interesting thing that just comes to mind in your narrative there was, okay, at some point it becomes part of the indigenous, or part of the kind of the philosophical thinking of the Aztec city-states, that the spotted dogs can be trickster dogs, can be unreliable guides and all that. But I always am interested in the origin of a weird belief. Someone has to present that initially, right? And it's usually not by committee. It's usually not a consensus of a group of 7 priests sitting around and coming up with that. Someone has to suggest a strange detail like that, and then it gains acceptance, right? And the trick of how an idea gains acceptance is a really, really fascinating one. Like, why is it allowed? Because we even have what are called apocryphal literatures, which are, we have scrolls that are, or sacred writings that are not allowed to be canonized really, or allowed to be part. They're not dismissed necessarily, but they're also not, and the question of why they don't make, sometimes that's part of the politics of knowledge. But in this instance, it is a really interesting question of who invented that, came up with that really cool differentiating feature, and how did it, why did it gain authorization? Were they the high priest? Was it something else that it was bound to? Was there a particular incident? Sometimes ideas like that come out of incidents. Something happens where, you know, and we'll never know this, you know, it's going to be lost in time, that some spotted dog in the, you know, in the village or something like that did something terrible, and then it became universalized, right? Or something like that. But yeah, it's an amazing anthropological question and philosophical question. I love it. Again, feel free to unravel this more for us if you'd like in the coming weeks. It's great.
Thanks.
Kiki, do you want to go ahead, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Jason, and hi, everybody. So I've just been thinking about like this idea of like reading or thinking about the Bible in a very like metaphorical sense, even this whole idea of like Christ consciousness, where we can think of Jesus as someone that was like trying to help us find like our inner Christ, like this idea of like the Kundalini, like in Hinduism as well, where Christ consciousness is something that we all have within us. And then in that context, we can kind of think of, there's this idea that we would think of Satan as like the lower vibration of the self, as opposed to like an actual like deity or anything like that. I was also kind of like thinking about like in Kabbalah, I know like in the Tree of Life, like when we look at the Sephiroth, we can describe God as having these kind of like human emanations or characteristics or quality, like beauty and knowledge and all these things. So I'm just wondering how helpful would that train of thought be when we also like thinking of these loser gods or deity as maybe emanations of like us as people, as opposed to like actual like deities or something like that.
Yeah, I love that you brought this up, because this is so why do ancient civilizations do their philosophy through gods? And I think it's a proper mechanism of thought, because sometimes you need to get outside of the perspective of something to see it. You have to take distance from an object of analysis in order to see it. We're too close to ourselves. We misunderstand ourselves. That's the whole psychoanalytic revolution. We don't understand ourselves because we're too sort of entangled. So sometimes we have to externalize something. Even this is how Freud reads ghosts. Ghosts are not for him otherworldly apparitions. They're emanations of our unconscious fears or desires that we have to, in order to understand them, in order to understand that we have terror in us or what is bothering us, we have to externalize it as a figment on a wall or something like that. So the ancients realized something that we don't like to talk about today in our air-conditioned malls and country clubs, which is that we are minefields of involuntary reactions. We sneeze, we cough, we bleed, we cry, you know, we gasp. We have all kinds of eruptions, even just at the space of the body, never mind the mind, right? And the ancients were aware of this porosity and this vulnerability and how accidental our physical existence is. And they manifested each one of those sensations, just like you said, those bodily experiences, as a god, including more abstract things like love and, you know, and rage. Because rage, you are out of control. Love, you fall in love. These are involuntary experiences to a great extent, right? No matter how much we try to control them or believe we're self-willing, they happen in their own anomalous ways. So the fact that they were mysterious meant that they felt almost like states of possession, which is why they decided to externalize them as God narratives. And it allowed them to analyze by creating backstories. You saw the conceptual connections and all of that. It allows them to map it much better than our unfortunately, for psychoanalysis' great genius, it gave us the worst method, the talking cure. Go and talk about yourself for 6 hours and you'll understand yourself better. The ancients would say, no way. You'll just run circles around that murky no man's land of your own consciousness and tell yourself a bunch of lies and idealizations and cliches and, you know, fabricated memories and all sorts of things that are selective and partial and subjective. It's better if you turn it into an object or an entity. And the other figure who would tell you this, who's the ultimate anti-psychoanalyst, is Deleuze, Gilles Deleuze, who will come up with the idea of the conceptual personage. So instead of thinking about the self, think of the body without organs. Think of the wolf man. Think of the becoming stones, right? This is his methodology as well. Sometimes it helps to incarnate an idea. And even Jung says this, even though I said that's anti-psychoanalytic. Jung says that we should turn our deepest, most visceral emotional states, we should think of them as masks or sub-identities. That's why he was interested in mythology as well, because then we can study them like characters in a book. The weird thing is the bet there, let me just say this, the bet there is that all of us could analyze a character in a book better than we could analyze ourselves. That the likelihood, I could do a much more sophisticated, elegant, deep, sensitive reading of Barabbas in Parlograph's book than I could talking about myself and my history, which is clouded by associations and weird bloodlines and identitarian, conditioning and all sorts of stuff. So that's what they did very intelligently, I think. And you're right. Some of those things, yes, are abstract and metaphysical questions, gods of pain, gods of fear. But some of those are really intimately bound to the body. That's why I brought up Limos, goddess of starvation and hunger. Like people were actually hungry and malnourished in our present world and in our ancient world. And it's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, we're facing this in the Middle East right now. There's a starvation epidemic in a particular conflict you're very well aware of that is particularly impacting children. Mass sort of child starvation happening right now. And I don't know what it would be like to offer them a goddess of starvation, which is like a comic book character to explain. You might think that's hideously cheap or petty or unproductive. So is going to the UN and begging for mercy, by the way, totally unproductive. But having ideological debates and political news channels talk endlessly about these people while their children are being killed. But offering them some superhero or some comic book character, it may be the lesser of evils of them dying for nothing. This random death, which is what they're experiencing, meaningless random extinction. So I don't know, but that's my humble opinion there. But yes, things like gods of lust, gods of anger, these are bodily reactions that I think it's wonderful that they turn them into mythic narratives. So anyway, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Vibrations, like you said, very nice. Peggy, do you wanna say something?
Oh, yeah, I was going to ask us about what the final project is going to be. I always worry ahead of time. And I really wanted to take this because for some reason I want to read Paradise Lost again, which I can't imagine why I want to do that, but I'm sure you'll.
Oh no,
let me do that.
I adore, by the way, Paradise Lost. I'll mention the assignment in a second, but I can't help just noticing one thing about Paradise Lost. For me, aside from the cool torment of Satan and these long monologues about his inner pain and his sense of betrayal and all that, which are brilliant and fascinating, I would just note that the term pandemonium, I may have said this in other places, pandemonium, which we think of as like a chaos space or something like that, all hell breaks loose, think of that notion, is actually the palace where Satan lives in Paradise Lost. It's the name of the palace. And pandemonium literally means all demons. It's the place of all demons. And so almost this sort of orgiastic excess of all the demons together. That's where he hosts his banquets for all the demons. And in my recent writing, I've mentioned the fact that I think that's the internet. I think the internet is a pandemonium digital space. It's the first of the new architecture of Paradise Lost idea of the palace, where all demons exist. I mean, that's what every conspiracy theory you can find online, every meme you can find online, every deep fake you can find online. So it has all the sort of the characteristics of a pandemonium. But oh, you asked about the assignment. The assignment will be the culmination of your 3 weeks of presentations. So even if by chance, I'm going to start next week just jumping straight into presentations, asking who goes first, who's got 2 minutes. The elaborated versions, written versions of those are what you hand in. There will be 3 installments then. Okay?
The same topic or the same god, or can we?
No, different gods each week.
Okay, so just.
I'm going to say this. Sorry. It's going to be 3 presented ones, and you're going to have 2 weeks in the aftermath to also do a 4th installment, which is an invented god of your own. So I want you to design a loser god. All right. Physiologically, however you want. Just create the apparatus. Okay. So it's going to be three presented forms, and then which you'll write out for me as well, and then a 4th one that's a creative, speculative one of your own. What else, Peggy, did you want to say?
What are we doing with the books? I started reading Barbarous, which I just would have a lot that I could say about it forever and ever, I think.
Yeah. I unfortunately we're only in 4 weeks together. And so if I could have, I would have spent 1 week in the intermediate weeks doing these texts. We can feel free to devote some time to discussing them if you want in the classes as well. So I could say, like, for next class, if you guys wanted to read, you could read Barabbas first. That's a really good one. Just start with that. Jump around. This is another thing too, because now you know the plot. You know who he is. You know what his punishment was, how he got lucky, he got up there, and he's wandering around wondering who this guy was that died for him and all of that, and who these Christians are that are willing to die for this dead god. Now you can jump around. You know, Deleuze said this about Thousand Plateaus. He said it's like an album that you can just change the song when you get tired of it. You can just flip to the next one. So I would say time travel, teleport through the text, find interesting passages, and we can reserve the last 15 or 20 minutes of class to talking about Barabbas as well for next week. And then we'll do the Sibyl, and then we'll do the dwarf. Okay?
Yep. Thank you.
Sure. Navid, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Go right ahead. Yes, I hear you well.
Okay. I was curious about humans who tempted the gods to granting them immortality, and like we hear a lot of like demigods who become very powerful or who are very virtuous. But in this camp, humans who became gods who like didn't meet their side of the bargain, who failed in some way, who became losers, who became exiled, which is kind of it's like bucking the trend of the Herculeses and the sort of the humans who agonize and then essentially have like learned something through that agony, become immortal and become worshipped, sort of en masse.
It's an amazing topic. So first of all, I would note that one of the really intriguing elements of the Judeo part, the Jewish part of the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, is that almost all of God's prophets are defective and losers in the Old Testament, right? Even Moses loses at the end. I don't know if you guys remember this or know this, but after 40 years wandering in the desert, parting the Red Sea, going up against Pharaoh, smashing the idols, creating the tablets, God gives him some arbitrary test on the mountain, says, go get water out of this rock. And Moses is an old man. He's probably got joint pains and arthritis at this point and everything. And he's kind of doesn't have much patience. He goes over to the rock and he says, give me some water. The rock doesn't respond. So he takes his cane and he smashes the rock. And God says, you didn't believe sufficiently. You didn't have faith. So I punish you. You will never see the land of milk and honey. You'll get to the borders, but you won't reach it. He condemns it. So Moses breaks the covenant. So does Cain, so do Adam and Eve, so does Satan, so do a lot of the prophets. And even the ones who don't officially break the covenant are problematic. Noah is a drunk. David is fit to tantrums of rage. We know that about King David. Solomon is a sex addict. He's basically got 700 wives for all his wisdom, right? Moses is a terrible stutterer, is incomprehensible, which is why when God chooses him, he says, Aaron, my brother, will have to translate for me, right? So God is choosing all kinds of problematic figures. Even the Prophet Muhammad was known to be epileptic. Many said would fall into seizures, right? And so it's an interesting thing. Most of the Old Testament prophets break the covenant, which is why it's a perfect setup for the Christians to think they solve the issue by making Jesus the one who seals the covenant again. So where Adam fails, the Son of Man will make it whole, will make it right. Except for that moment we all hide where he says, Father, why have you forsaken me? And he becomes atheistic on the cross himself, right? He doubts God, which we don't talk about, right? That moment of fracture. But this idea then that even built into the monotheistic tradition, you have prophets who didn't uphold. By the way, interesting one is Abraham. Kierkegaard talks about this, the Knight of Infinite Faith. Abraham is the one person who never questions or doubts God, but he's a lunatic, according to Kierkegaard. He's absurd. He'll kill his own kid and be like, that's cool, whatever you want. And Kierkegaard's terrified, as a great devout Christian, he's terrified of what it means that if he met this guy in the street, he'd think he's an insane person who should be committed. And that's the only one who can hold the covenant up. Even Christ cries in the garden and begs for God to not crucify him. Abraham's like, all right, cool, I'll kill my kid for you. No problem, no shame in his game, no slack in his act. But the other thing that you brought up, so I would say this, David, you have vampire assistants. There's a sub-literature of vampire assistants. Vampires usually have somebody who serves them for however many years or decades, does their dirty work, gets them bodies, things like that, in the promise that they will be turned into a vampire. And yes, there are equivalents in sacred traditions of people who are nominated, humans who are nominated to be given either entrance to paradise or divine qualities if they pass certain tests or if they held up their end of the bargain. It's really interesting to see which vampires grant immortality and turn their assistants, which ones don't, why they don't at any given moment, and also in that tradition. But there's also, so this is something heretical, but Navid, you might know this well. In Sufi mysticism, you're in mainstream Islam, you're not supposed to deify the Prophet, which is why most Muslim countries don't even really celebrate the Prophet's birthday, because it would be considered idolatry. It's idol making. The Prophet is a normal human being, an ideal human being, an exemplary human being, a wonderful, noble human being, Muhammad, but he's not a god. And only God should be worshipped in Islam, right? That's why you're not supposed to pray to Muhammad and all that. But of course, Navid, the Persians screw this all up. And in their Shiism, they become super pagan in their worship of imams and other, human beings who are kind of divine incarnations. They steal this from Christianity, by the way, the idea of from Christ being a representation of God on the earth. And Shias go full-fledged. There are 12 of them, right? What's interesting there, though, is that even Sufi mystics will tell stories about the Mi'raj, which is the night journey of Muhammad through the cosmos. It's a hallucinatory, bizarro landscape where he talks to all the ancient prophets, he sees the angels and all that. And there are moments when he's given miraculous ability. So this is something heretical, partially, you could say, but it's really interesting how on certain nights, that night of the night journey, Muhammad is given godlike powers. He flies through galaxies, he can breathe in the upper stratospheres of outer space, and he's even allowed to see. One of the ultimate things is, you guys remember that You guys remember that Moses can only see God as a burning bush. And the reason is that the face of God would mean instant annihilation. So would the name of God. So what's interesting in Sufi literatures about the night journey of the Prophet Muhammad is that when he arrives at the final station, which is God's throne, it's an empty throne that is spinning frenetically, and there are angels who are headless angels who are circumambulating around it, yelling, I don't know through what mouth hole, because they have no mouths, but where their voice comes from, but yelling, the throne does not know where you are. Very cool. So that's Muhammad's revelation of the secret of metaphysics, the secret of the cosmos. Metaphysics is an empty throne around which headless angels are disoriented and trying to find the God force. Right? And that is supposed to be an image that is completely forbidden from human perception. Right? Why Muhammad is allowed to see it, if you go quickly and you look into Mi'raj literature, it's because he passes a test. He passes the test of cups. 3 cups are put before him with 3 different liquids. I believe it's blood, milk, and water. And he's told to drink from the right one. And he chooses the right one. It's a cool carnivalesque notion there, but this goes to you can look for it yourself if you want for next week. It's a great topic. You can look for examples of figures if you want who almost made it to God status, or or who were promised God's or had a shot at God status or something like that, or paradise, and who were deprived of that, who lost that destiny in some way, or who gained it, if you want, who acquired it. It's very interesting to see. And actually, just the last thing I would say to that is the Elysian fields in Greek mythology, which is where all the heroes go, their only notion of paradise is not a dichotomous vertical dialectic between heaven and hell. It's in hell. It's a part of the underworld. It's a nice gated city. It's like a kind of luxury area neighborhood that they get to hang out in. But who gains entrance into the Elysian fields has nothing to do with morality. Remember, Hercules is not a moral actor. He's a horrible human being. So is
Is it true that you had
Yeah.
to be reborn 3 times in order to gain access?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
another interesting ritual techniques of how you get into the Elysian fields. But no one, by our standards, Hercules, who strangles his newborn child and his wife to death, should not get into heaven. But he does in the ancient Greek mythology. And that doesn't mean they're savage for this thinking, whatever that means, or primitive in their thinking. In fact, it makes them more complex in their understanding of how you gain entrance to the nightclub of metaphysics. It's not wrong to think of like how an elite New York City nightclub functions and who gets in, and to think metaphysics might just be a macrocosmic version of that. Right? Who's on the list, who's not on the list, right? So at any rate, very cool. Lucy, what do you got for us, please?
Hi, Jason. Hi, everyone. So I'm coming from the creativity and intoxication seminar. So my question is maybe tied to this idea of the magical helper, the one who like offers at a cost somehow, which I guess applies to a lot of these figures, but also that we could consider like a substance, drug to be a magical helper. And we could also think of like Siri and these kind of AI things as also offering at a kind of cost. And I wondered like what thoughts you had on that, and also how that connects with seduction, because it's something that is being offered and to get us closer to the spiritual perhaps, or something else, or to knowing. And then yeah, I also wondered, I wondered if you had any unusual ones, or also any thoughts on like then substances as gods as well.
Oh, that's amazing. What a great question. So first, let me focus before we get to the elixirs and potions and substances and stimulants, which is amazing. I mentioned earlier that even the oracle at Delphi is in a pit, that now it's been discovered that there's probably some type of hypoxia, some type of sort of brain deprivation that was happening in those pits that were causing hallucinatory visions. So a lot of it has to do with the mold, the dankness, the atmospheric pressures of things. But before that, you mentioned a great thing is that there's another classification. Gods are not always full-formed, full-fledged gods. They're intermediary gods too. So if you even take like Dionysus, he has this Pan, figure, this goat creature who plays the pipes and all of that, who lure and bring people to the ecstatic rituals of Dionysus. Now, is Pan a god? Kind of. I mean, he's a weird little creature, but he's not a human and he's not an animal in the traditional sense. He's nothing that is found in nature, in which case he's supernatural. So there are supernatural entities that, precisely like you said, they are the go-betweens. They traffic between the top gods and the human sort of, and they make deals for them or they guide them. So you can even think of like the fairy godmother in fairy tales, right? So it's not clear where the fairy godmother gets her original powers from, right? Was she a human who then became charmed? Did she die to become this figure, this magical figure? Where is the source or depository of her magic? Is it learned? Is it inherent? Is it a gift from the gods? Which gods does she worship? And you can even go to like the Wizard of Oz and wonder these questions. I mean, sort of, who are these witches getting their powers from? Is it from nature? Is it that they unlock certain spells or techniques? Is it a form of knowledge? Or is it a pure gift that is given to them by some unspoken higher figure? I love the fact that the patriarchal figure in the Wizard of Oz is a fraud. The wizard is a complete, he's a sham. He's a charlatan and a liar. He's a technologist. He uses machinic apparatuses to make himself look, powerful. So, but then the weird thing is, while he's a fake, there are actual witches in Oz, and they are the ones who send Dorothy to him, which is a weird question of why would they send someone with why would they send her to someone with false magical power, with technology, over their skill set? It's an interesting question, but yes. So I love this idea of these guides, these figures, and all that. And yes, the fact that they often operate through drugs, elixirs, drinks, potions. I just spent weeks researching an ancient astronomical cult called the Sabians. The Sabians are amazing figures of the ancient world, but all the way up to the medieval times, who had 7 planetary temples in their city of Haran. Haran is also, weirdly enough, the site in the Bible that was supposed to be where Jacob saw the ladder to heaven, but it's an astronomical. It's a city of a cult of mathematicians and astronomers who worshipped planets. And weirdly enough, I'll just say this: if you look at the Quran, the Islamic holy book, there are 3 groups that are exempt from being persecuted by Muslims or being converted. One are the Christians, one are the Jews, and the third are the Sabians, who are star worshippers, pagan star worshippers. And you might ask, why would they get an exemption in the Quran from a monotheistic religion? In 3 places, it said the Sabians are not to be touched. And the reason is because Islam stole a lot of their ritual practices. It's the Sabian mathematicians who, Navid, you're right on this, the Nabatean agriculture, absolutely. That's Sabian mathematicians were the ones who figured out the 5 times of day that you're supposed to pray in Islam. So they took certain elements from them, and as a reward, they made them part of the untouchable religions that you could not do violence against. So anyway, what I love about this, the reason I bring it up is that they had 7 temples with 7 totally different architectures, different metallic and stone components, meaning the designs, the architecture were totally different, from Mars to Venus to Saturn to Jupiter, right? And I've studied every one of them now. Some used copper, some used diamonds, some used gold, some used silver. The moon and the sun had their own ones. But here's the best part: they had their own fashion. So each priest, the priesthoods of each one wore totally different robes, totally different color schemes. But here's the best part. They each had their own mixed drink. So anyone who was entering the antechambers of one of the 7 planetary domes got a different drink, and mixed with some weird stuff too. I mean, there's some that, I mean, some had, Mars had blood in it. The couple of them had the crushed bits of skull in one of them. Another one had myrrh, which is what you use for the dead, myrrh and camphor. So, and others tasted good from what I could read, but those are the bad ones. My mind goes towards the negative sometimes. But yes, so this is amazing that for them, gods were not human forces. They were planetary orbits that then could manifest in object worlds, in drinks, each had their own perfumes, their own fragrance. So by the way, this is something you'll notice hotels, luxury hotels do these days. They have their own signature fragrance when you walk into the lobby now. If you ever go to Dubai, that's a big thing. In all the 5-star hotels of Dubai, every one of them has their own luxury signature fragrance that you can only get in the lobby of that hotel. Well, that's a Sabian cult practice, as far as I'm concerned. So yes, the idea that God could manifest as a perfume, and that wasn't symbolic or metaphorical, but rather as appropriate an emanation of a force as was a celestial body. So it's not just a representative form, it's an animated sort of carrier of the potentiality, if that helps. Yeah. So, and we'll think about the types of euphoria. What I like is that these gods they run the spectrum, loser gods, between euphoria and torment. So Dionysus is a loser god, but he's the god of ecstasy. He's the god of parties, and he's the god of wine. He's a loser god, and he's never invited to the major councils, the war councils, the political councils. He's the sort of the unwanted sheep of the pantheon, right? But then there are gods who are accursed gods who are tormented as well, as we've seen, who ask major existential questions about why they are solitary, why they are disliked. A great suggestion I always make is Jorge Luis Borges has a beautiful short piece called The House of Asterion, which is written from the perspective of the Minotaur in the labyrinth. Minotaur, half bull, half man. And no one ever thinks, we think it's a bull, so we don't think it thinks or talks, but he does this exquisite 3-page narrative from the perspective and the outlook of the Minotaur. And he accuses us of being cruel and of being vicious. He eats because he's hungry. He crushes bones in his teeth because he's hungry. He's starved in the labyrinth. But we mock him and we scream. He says there's nothing more painful than having women, men, and children scream at sight of you. So it's a gorgeous, gorgeous thing. But you see, then that's a figure of ultimate torment, just like Frankenstein's monster and all that. So we run the spectrum. The interesting thing is the paradox of those who are capable of ecstasy and torment simultaneously, which we'll talk about too. Reda, hi, how are you? Nice to see you.
Hello, Jason. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I think it's my question is, or my observation is in the continuation of Kike's question, how to philosophize through divinities. So, and I always love this part of Ibn Ala al-Ma'arri in his Epistle of Forgiveness, how he made Satan look like this queer looking figure. So, I mean, his quote goes like, I owe Bashar. So he's talking about this poet, Bashar ibn Burd, was a sort of early Satanist or something like that, a Satanistic poet. He says, I owe Bashar something that I do not owe any other son of Adam, unlike all other poets. So it's Satan speaking, preferred me to Adam, for he said, Satan is better than your father, Adam. You wicked people understand this well. His element is fire, and Adam is of mud. Mud will never rise as high as fire, And he go on, and Satan adds in the episode of forgiveness, Satan says, he spoke the truth, but those who speak the truth will always be hated. And so I think Ibn Ala al-Mari resumed this uh, the position of the philosophers and called the heretics of his time, and he's more radical, speaking in the tongue of Satan, that he says he take the side of the queer at the time of the homosexuals, because Satan uh, in this situation, like chained in hell, he asks Al-Qarih of a favor. And the poet Al-Qarih, the main character of the episode of forgiveness, says that thinks that Satan is asking for water or wine, because there is no wine nor water in hell. And Al-Qarih says, respond to Satan that I won't give you water or hell, because you are Satan. You are like the first traitor of God. So I'm not doing you any favor. And then Satan responds that no, I'm not asking for water or wine, but I'm inquiring about the homosexual situation. Uh, is Allah allowing homosexuality in paradise? He who allows everything in paradise. So somehow those loser gods are always taking the side of the margins, even in and through the poets, because even a figure like Al-Hallaj, through the
Yeah.
to the ink of Massignon is like Jesus, and even Jesus in the through the writings of Mark Fisher, again, in a comment in The Passion of Christ, he says, better to lead the organism better to death than to bow bent-headed to authority. So I think there is this continuity between the poet and the novelist and the god, or the loser god. So
I love where you're going with this. There's so much there, because there are tragic romantic readings of Satan. So we have that in Sufi literature, where Satan was the one, what you quoted, where he's brought before Adam and God says, this is my new creation. He will inherit the world, bow before him. And all the other angels, like good Nazi officers, just follow orders. They bow without thinking. And Satan says, why should I bow to him? He's made of dirt or mud, as you said. I'm made of fire. I know the secrets of the universe and of creation. He's a Ken doll. Basically, he's an airhead. He's an idiot who doesn't know anything. I'm superior to him. Why should I bow before him? It's unjust. And God casts him out for pride. The interesting thing is, if you're a leftist doing a revolutionary reading, he is absolutely entitled to question this tyrannical hierarchy, this unjust subordination, before Adam and all of that. And so there are communist readings of Satan that, that's why he hangs out with they're ones of Christ though too. If you look at who Christ hangs out with, it's the poorest people, fishermen, lepers, prostitutes, beggars. This is his first population as well. But Satan does too. Satan hangs out. And there are queer readings of Satan. If you look at even Faust by Goethe, Satan is highly stylized, always described through these elaborate costumes, sophisticated fashion. Now, particularly in Islam, Rada, you know that God is faceless, which is why one of the great heresies is the idea that Christ is God, right? Or the Son of God, because God has no body or face. By complete opposition, then, the devil is entirely about body and face, has many bodies and faces. And so it's a constant kind of fashion exhibition. Mephistopheles in Faust is super stylish, right? Not just in appearance, but also in language, I would note, right? And I love this because in sacred writings, God's tonality is often flat in the form of commands. The devil's is much more complicated and poetic, and uses layerings and tonality, intonation, and a lot of stuff. Is much better writer. Is allowed to be. So also a much better dresser. Also just it's very interesting in that regard. So, and this idea, yeah, the interesting thing is that what you mentioned, Satan also calls God on the hypocrisy. So in heaven, in Islamic heaven, you are granted sort of sexual access to a species of supernatural beings, right? The Huris or the Ghelman, whatever, for men and for women. But what's really intriguing is if you ever read about the descriptions of these sex bots, essentially, like heavenly sex bots, because they're there as pleasure vessels for those who make it to paradise. It's kind of like Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner, that some of the cyborgs are constructed just for sexual pleasure. You'll notice they're androgynous. And actually, the first angels in depictions are hermaphroditic. And so there is a transgender element embedded in the most sacred descriptions of the pleasure centers of the divine. Why are the angels hermaphrodites? Why are the pleasures? Why are they androgynous? You know, in a way, or both sexes simultaneously. It's interesting. So definitely, you've got a lot of places where you can go there, and yes, even Satan can, according to some legends, can gender bend in ways that angels, for instance, cannot, or God cannot, as the pure patriarch. That Satan can appear as a woman, right? Or Satan can send his daughters. So if you guys even watch The Devil's Advocate, which is starring Al Pacino and Keanu Reeves, who the poor guy looks like a deer caught in the headlights the whole time when he's in a scene with Pacino. He's really at a disadvantage as an actor, but nevertheless, he carries his own there to get to the final point. But the main way that the devil gets to him is through his daughter. And so it's interesting how yeah, all these questions work for sure. And the idea, we'll get into it, the idea of the freak is going to be something that I want us to really look at, or the queer, or the alien, sort of, you know, it's something for us to explore here. And to think, what complicates is that our contemporary cultural and social understanding of that is to see them as purely subordinated and oppressed figures. But I love that ancient and medieval cultures give us more imaginations of seeing them as God types too. Right? That's really important, I think, for us to give them that agency. This is where, when Mahmoud Darwish, the great Palestinian poet, says one of my favorite lines, "And I am one of the kings of the end." Meaning he's living through an apocalypse, through a disaster, through the siege and extinction of his homeland and of his people. And yet he's a king. Might as well have said God. You know, I'm one of the gods of the end. I'm one of the kings of the end. So there's something for us, a paradox for us to unlock there. I'm sorry, we're over, I think, Marina, right? We're over time at this point. So Drew, I'm very sorry we didn't get around. I promise next time. Why don't you speak first? Whatever you wanted to say.
And please
worries.
feel free to post the questions on the Discord chat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can post it too. All right, everyone. Good seeing you. I talked mainly this week. Next week, it's on your shoulders. I get to sit back and listen and engage. So bring your best stuff. Okay? I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marina, if you just want to stay just 1 minute so you and I can just I can just tell you one or two things. Bye, everyone.